Hello everyone. This is the 17th part of the story, Abe the Wizard. Chapter 68, The Prince was going after them. Within a luxury room of Cosmo Hotel, the largest hotel in Harvest City, Prince Wyatt was sitting on a chair with a face full of gloom. The coffee on his table had gone cold long ago. "Your Majesty, don't be so angry. It's not good for your health," said the elite night guard of Alsop. He was trying his best to carefully comfort Prince Wyatt. In regards to a banquet, the prince and the 3 elite knights had attended yesterday. Because they were not a noble, they had dinner with the retinues. A group of bogans could make fun of the offspring of King George. They must have forgotten who was the true ruler of this country. Prince Wyatt had been holding his anger back since the banquet, so he began to lash out through the comfort of the Knight of Alsop. When he thought about the ridicule looks of the Harvest City's noble, Viscount Dickens' offense, and the lack of respect Abel had shown him, Prince Wyatt, who was spoiled by thousands, was furious. If he tries his best, he could tolerate the ridicule of nobles and offense of Viscount Dickens. However, he could never tolerate a 13-year-old teenager unwilling to respect his status. "Alsop, what would happen if I kill Abel?" Prince Wyatt trusted the Knight of Alsop a lot, so he had directly told him his intention. This idea had deeply shocked the Knight of Alsop. He quickly replied, "Your Majesty, we must not try to mess with Abel. Otherwise, we would become enemies with the entire blacksmith union. If I have to seek this revenge, I will never be satisfied," said Prince Wyatt as he ruthlessly stared at the Knight of Alsop. He then proceeded to say, "If I can't kill Abel, how about the Lord of Marshall? Your Majesty, the blacksmith union probably won't give us any trouble for killing an ordinary lord. Moreover, we can just blame it as a robbery attack." The Knight of Alsop replied softly. "Nice, I'll leave it to you," Prince Wyatt said ruthlessly. The Knight of Alsop looked at Prince Wyatt with a hint of embarrassment. Although he was an elite knight, he was not confident in murdering an intermediate knight by himself. Murdering someone was different from defeating someone in a battle. If the Lord of Marshall had escaped, they could have big trouble. The Knight of Alsop was the only guard out of the 4 who had a close relationship with the prince. The other 3 elite knights belonged to the Royal Defense Force. They were only responsible for the safety of the prince, and they would never needlessly attack a noble based solely on the prince's interest. Seeing the embarrassed look of the Knight of Alsop, Prince Wyatt couldn't help but sigh. He then proceeded to say, "Take these 10,000 gold coins and see which one of the 3 are willing to come with you. Also, take this magic sword with you. I want Abel's stepfather to die in the strikes of his own sword." "That will be perfect. 10,000 gold coins would be more than enough to persuade those greedy bastards," the Knight of Alsop said with ease. The banquet in Harry Castle had ended, yet the Lord of Marshall could not settle. He had to go visit a friend in Harvest City and exchange some night fighting techniques with him. Almost everyone in the castle knew the reason behind the Lord's visit. Right in the morning, the Lord of Marshall got on his bull carriage and headed towards Harvest City. He enjoyed riding on his carriage lately. Not only because the 2 inferno bulls were very eye-catching, but most of all, this carriage was some of the most comfortable things he had ever sat on. The sun was blazing outside, so the Lord of Marshall turned the air conditioner to level 6. He closed his eyes, enjoying this rare cool breeze under the summer heat. If he had a bottle of wine with him, it would be perfect. The first thing he wanted to do when he returned to his castle was to tell someone to add a liquor cabinet in this carriage. "Master, someone is blocking the way," said the driver with a shaky voice, as the bull carriage came to a halt. As the Lord of Marshall was enjoying himself, suddenly, his heart dropped. He was reminded of the warning which Abel had given him. He began to pick up his big sword with the rumble ability, while clinched his shield with the other hand. He peeked outside the carriage. At first, the Knight of Alsop thought about attacking the Lord of Marshall when he was unaware, but the other elite knight that came along with him refused. As the Knight of the Royal Defense Force, they had to respect the knight's virtues. They could not attack an opponent who was not prepared. Therefore, the Knight of Alsop had no choice. He had to block the carriage and directly attack the Lord of Marshall. "Are you guys Prince Wyatt's elite knights?" The Lord of Marshall recognized they were two of the 4 knights guarding Prince Wyatt during the banquet. "I am here to take your life, but will give you a chance to battle," said he. Knight of Alsop. He one-handedly lifted his big sword and drew a straight line in midair. Then he put his sword back to his side and made a knight gesture of manner. "Fair enough. You followed the knight's virtues." The Lord of Marshall looked at the 2 elite knights on the horse with a sneer. The Knight of Alsop knew that the Lord of Marshall was an intermediate knight. Defeating him was easy. The hard part was to not let him escape, so the elite knights did not disarm their horse. Although the carriage driver was paranoid, he remained silent. He knew that he would only have the chance to keep his life if the Lord of Marshall won this battle. If not, the 2 elite knights would not give a peasant like him a chance to go back and report them. The Knight of Alsop squeezed the horse with his leg, the horse let out a long neigh and began to rush forward with its muscly legs. With the speed of the horse and the roar of the Knight of Alsop, his body and his big sword were covered in combat chi. He began to strike around 5 meters in front of the Lord of Marshall. Under the combination of all these forces, the knight seemed unstoppable. Defense. The Lord of Marshall roared. He placed his faith in Abel and his magic shield. Moreover, he was also all too familiar with this knight defense move. He had executed it perfectly in battles countless times and counteracted countless enemies. The Lord of Marshall held the shield with his left hand and placed the magic shield in front of him. His body leaned forward, front leg bent and back leg straight. The Lord was ready to take on the Knight of Alsop's attack. Dong, the sword of the Knight of Alsop struck upon the shield of the Lord of Marshall. At first, he was expecting his sword to penetrate the shield, then he could finish off the Lord of Marshall with thunderstorm combination strikes. The Lord of Marshall was fully aware of how powerful the charging attack of an elite knight could be, so he almost used full force in this defense. However, little did he know, when he was holding this magic shield he almost did not feel a thing at all. The strike had been counteracted. The Knight of Alsop was shocked as he went straight past the Lord of Marshall. The Lord of Marshall did not even budge a bit. How was this possible? The magic sword in his hand was exchanged with a yard in Triumph Boulevard, valued at 50,000, and it could not even defeat an intermediate knight. The Knight of Alsop began to wonder if he had been scammed. The Knight of Alsop looked a bit distracted, yet the Lord of Marshall remained in full focus. All these years of battle experience had taught him that he has to constantly look for the chance to execute the final strike, so if he was not focused all the time, it would be suicide. In that split second, the Lord of Marshall began to flash his combat chi and rushed straight towards the Knight of Alsop. Although his horse was not as fast as, his impose was just as strong. The Knight of Alsop only realized what was happening through the call of the other elite knight who was watching by the side. At that moment the Lord of Marshall was already right before him. So the Knight of Alsop quickly dashed out a counteract move with his sword. To his surprise, this strike by the Lord of Marshall was extremely light, like the strike of a normal civilian. But after a while, he felt the force of a mountain pressing upon him, alongside his horse. He could not help but began to step back. Under the influence of the magic sword's rumble, the Knight of Alsop's defense was defenseless, he was completely exposed. This was all in the plan of the Lord of Marshall. The reason he did not use any force in his strike was that all his force was concentrated on his leg. As the Knight of Alsop was stepping back, he immediately jumped towards the Knight of Alsop holding his shield. Like a stroke of lightning, his big sword let out a cold flash of light and penetrated the gap between the armor in the waist of the Knight of Alsop. Normally this gap was very hard to penetrate if it was not being exposed, so the Lord of Marshall had taken advantage of it. Chapter 69, Victory to the Knight of Gold. That strike was very powerful. Since intermediate knights could inject their combat chi into their weapons, a large amount of destructive combat chi rushed inside the body of the Knight of Alsop. In a blink of an eye, he lost all of his fighting power and fell from his warhorse. Attack! The other elite knight roared, a long white string of combat AI shot out from his big sword. Although these long-distance attacks were exclusively used by elite knights, they would rarely use it because it used up too much of their combat chi, which was not sustainable. Defense! The Lord of Martial also roared. The shot of combat chi struck upon the shield, but the result was the same. The Lord of Martial did not even budge behind the shield. By that point, the Lord of Martial had become very confident. With equipment over the value of 400,000, even an intermediate knight like himself could easily counteract the attacks of an elite knight. When the other elite knight saw that the Lord of Martial had easily defeated the Knight of Alsop, he decided to change his strategy and do long-distance attacks instead, since he was the same rank as the Knight of Alsop. Before he could fully understand why the Lord of Martial had defeated the Knight of Alsop so easily, he would keep his distance. However, an elite knight could not keep using these long distance for long. He began to have a change of heart. He rather just returned the 10,000 gold coins to the prince because it was not worth it to risk his life. The other elite knight continued to shoot out his powerful combat chi, sparkling in midair. Yet, the Lord of Martial could counteract it perfectly every time from different positions. The Lord of Martial was waiting for the other elite knight to fatigue. He thought, other than a head commander, these elite knights could not sustain these long-distance attack for long. Suddenly, with the shot of another combat chi, the elite knight began to turn around. In a blink of an eye, he had accelerated on his horse and began to escape. The Lord of Martial felt a bit confused. This was an elite knight, why was he trying to escape? The Lord of Martial did not chase after him immediately, his legs could not outrun the legs of a warhorse. Although he could use the Knight of Alsop's warhorse, it would take some time before they could be harmonized. The Lord of Martial returned to his horse carriage, put down the shield in his trunk and took out the hairy bow. By the time point he had set up the bow, the elite knight was around 100 meters away. He lightly let loose the bowstring. In a split second the arrow had disappeared from the bow, and soon reappeared in the back of the elite knight. Elite knights were not only powerful due to their ability to use combat chi, but it was also because they had very sharp alertness to danger. Although it was almost impossible for a normal person to avoid this arrow, in a blink of an eye, the elite knight lightly twisted his body. The arrow traveled through his right arm and struck right in the center of his warhorse's skull. The warhorse skidded and fell to the ground, sending the elite knight flying forward. The moment when the knight was about to hit the ground, he did a body roll and stood up straight away. He did not stop as he continued to unleash his combat chi, madly running towards the forest nearby. Only a dead warhorse and the blood of his right arm was left on the ground. All of these things had taken place in almost no time. Before the Lord of Martial could install another arrow, the elite knight had already disappeared. The hairy bow was too weak. The Lord of Martial concluded. He failed this time was because the bow only had 400 pounds worth of strength. If it had 500 pounds, no way this knight could escape. The Lord of Martial must have forgotten, the strongest bow in this world could only possess about 200 pounds worth of strength. Only this composite bow that Abel had modified could have such power. The Lord of Martial knew he could not chase after this knight anymore. However, he had already badly injured an elite knight and scared off another. The knights even left their mounts behind, so the Lord of Martial was very pleased with how this battle had turned out. He then walked towards the body of the Knight of Alsop. At the time, the knight had already stopped breathing. The first thing the Lord noticed was his magic sword. Isn't this the sword Abel had forged? The Lord of Martial was surprised to find this sword and he was happy to take it as his spoils of war. This way was a lot better than asking Abel directly. His two ways of acquiring these magic weapons would make a night and day difference when he would brag about it to his friends. The Lord of Martial had secured the Knight of Alsop's warhorse behind the back of his carriage and threw the dead body of the Knight of Alsop on top of it. He no longer felt like going to his friends as he headed straight towards the city palace. The Country Defense Force elite knight returned to the Cosmo Hotel covered in blood. With the help of the other guards, he entered the room of Prince Wyatt. Upon seeing that only one of the 2 elite knights he sent had returned, not only that but covered in blood, Prince Wyatt can't help but get angry. He roared, "The Knight of Kyle, where is Alsop? Why only you had returned? Your Majesty, the accident had failed, the Knight of Alsop was badly injured. I'm not sure if he's dead or alive. I've only got lucky and escaped." The Knight of Kyle's face was drenched in sweat. He continued to use his combat chi to escape after being injured. His current condition was not looking too well. If he doesn't recover probably, he might not be able to preserve his elite knight's power. As the guard of the prince, it was his responsibility to report what had happened. Therefore, no matter what, he had to hold back his pain and rush back here. Rubbish. 2 elite knights can't even defeat an intermediate knight. Why didn't you die in the battlefield instead? Prince Wyatt roared furiously, as he threw his wine glass at the Knight of Kyle. The other knights saw that the Knight of Kyle was about to faint, so they quickly stepped up and held him by the arm. The knights made eye contact with each other. Their gaze showed a sense of anger, sorrow and dissatisfaction for the prince. There was a price to a knight's loyalty. No matter what, they have to be loyal to the person they were loyal to. The prince didn't even seem to even care if the Knight of Alsop was dead or alive. All he cared about was if they had completed the mission for him. The knights all felt a sense of disappointment and sorrow. "How many opponents did you had?" asked Prince Wyatt, ignoring the poor condition which the Knight of Kyle was in. "Only the Lord of Marshall." The Knight of Kyle said with a lot of effort. "How can Marshall be that powerful? He was only an intermediate knight and he could defeat elite knights," said Prince Wyatt suspiciously. Suddenly, he remembered something. He ruthlessly stared at the Knight of Kyle. "Where is the magic sword that the Knight of Alsop had brought along with him?" "Your Majesty, I have no choice but to escape. I did not have time to retrieve the magic weapon," said the Knight of Kyle. His face had become paler. "That thing worth 50,000 gold coins, and you didn't retrieve it?" said Prince Wyatt. His suspicions continued to increase. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. But as he looks at the wound on the Knight of Kyle, he couldn't help but groan. Suddenly, the prince had another idea. He began to mutter, "If the Lord of Marshall could defeat 3 elite knights, will he come after me? Damn, I should have brought more guards along with me." At this moment the prince no longer cared if the Lord of Marshall was dead or alive. He was only an ordinary lord after all. The only thing that was worrying about was if the Lord of Marshall would urge to come to Harvest City and find him. The guards next to him could be no match with the Lord. "Prepare the horse, we have to leave now," Prince Wyatt shouted at the healthy guards. "With the current condition of the Knight of Kyle, he cannot ride a horse," said an elite knight pointing at the Knight of Kyle. "We'll leave him here, just give some money to the servants and tell them to take care of him. Now let's hurry and get out of here," said Prince Wyatt. He looked at the blood-drenched Knight of Kyle, and it sent shivers down his spine. He thought, if the Lord of Marshall decided to seek, he might end up like the Knight of Kyle. This action by the prince had made the elite knights utterly disappointed. They decided that the first thing they would do when they got back was to resign from the country's defense force. A majesty like this doesn't deserve to be served by them. Not long after Prince Wyatt had left, Viscount Dickens led a few men into Cosmo Hotel. They realized that the prince had already escaped. They captured the Knight of Kyle who was been left behind. Chapter 70, Chase Them Down. Prince Wyatt's attempt to assassinate Marshall did not go as smoothly as he had expected. He was the son of King Astor in the Duchy of Carmel. This meant that his attempt would significantly deepen the already tense relationship between the royals and the nobles. As a knight who has been awarded the title of lord through attaining outstanding military service, and with Abel as his adopted son, who was also a newly promoted lord and a blacksmith master. Harry Castle within Harvest City could be found in the discussion among every noble in Duchy of Carmel. This family with a unicorn as their coat of armor had produced 2 lords, and both of them gained their fiefdom through outstanding military service. The Lord of Marshall had suddenly become the idol of many nobles and knights. There was only one opportunity every 4 or 5 years to become an owner of a knight estate. That's why it was every knight's dream to achieve this title. When the Lord of Marshall was young, he fought bravely against the orcs and was granted fiefdom, and ultimately, he was awarded the title of a knight due to this heroic deeds, as well as demonstrating the valor in the code of chivalry. His love for his wife, infatuation for life and death, and his effort in guarding the castle where his wife was buried in, all showed how Marshall had truly kept the knight's declaration of, "I swear to love and death." He alone had defeated 20 orcs, the majority of them, and protected the castle against attackers. He rescued Matthew's castle, with the identity of an intermediate knight alongside Abel. Together, they repelled against the attacking enemies. Everything the Lord of Marshall had done was noticed by the world due to his title as a knight. As time passed, more and more people began to notice him. It was at this time that Viscount Dickens had submitted the attempted assassination of Marshall towards the arbitration tribunal for nobles. The 2 elite knights, one dead and one alive, who were responsible for the assassins were both captured and brought to court. When the news had spread, there was an uproar amongst the nobles. They were called the nobles due to their prestige identity, and they were honored and respected by many. In the noble circle, any hatred for between any nobles would be solved by a formal duel. The duel would invite the noble to arbitrate. A private attack on the nobles would generally be a felony. However, if it was an ordinary person, showing any signs of hostility would have already been a serious crime. If a nobleman was defeated on the battlefield and demanded the treatment of the nobleman as a prisoner of war, no one would have dared violate the rule of knights. All these rules and laws were designed to keep the nobility safe. But now, a royal member had attempted to kill a lord who had just been honored for his merit. This made the nobles even angrier than before. After the noble court of honor had collected all of the pieces of evidence, they informed every noble family in the city. The 4 big noble families of Bakong City, led by the Lord of Marshall's relatives the Harry family, fired a report to King Astor Gorge, demanding Prince Wyatt should be punished harshly. At that moment, Abel was sitting on White Cloud. When he heard that Marshall was being attacked, he immediately went into the operations room and forged 4 exploding big swords. He even placed the scroll of town portal, which had never left him, into a metal box. As Abel filled the Horadric cubes with 4 exploding big swords, he took a spear from the weapons rack and called out White Cloud from the forest behind the castle. "White Cloud, let's go faster today," Abel said softly as he gently patted White Cloud on the neck. White Cloud gave a little tweet, indicated that it understood what Abel said and promptly flapped its wings. Knowing Abel's hurriedness, it quickly flew as fast as it could and its huge body passed through the clouds and broke it apart. Abel assumed that Prince Wyatt and his guards must have been rushing back towards Bakong City as soon as possible. When the direction was confirmed, Abel carefully examined the ground and quickly regretted not completing his telescope. If he had a telescope, it would have been much more convenient. "Let's take a break, Your Majesty. The horses are tired," one of the night guards said to Prince Wyatt as he felt sorry for the horses. "It's a long way from Harvest City. I don't think Marshall will be able to chase us here. Let's have a rest here for a bit," Prince Wyatt said as he nodded at the horses, who were all sweating and snorting. Since the 3 left in a hurry, they needed to travel lightly and left their carriages and servants behind. It seemed to be that they would be returning to Bakong City with only themselves. A night guard lit a bonfire, while the other went hunting, who was overqualified to do so as an elite knight. Within a short moment, he had already caught 2 rabbits and a wild chicken. Soon, it was on the fire, ready to be served as food. "When I get back to Bakong City, I'll get my men together and walk all over Harry Castle. Prince Wyatt ranted as he ate the tasteless food. The elite knights were silent, quietly eating their food while ignoring the prince's words. Prince Wyatt noticed the silent protest from these knights. He became very dissatisfied with their attitude since he believed that they were supposed to protect him with their lives. Although Prince Wyatt was born a royal, he was only the fourth prince. There were 3 brothers that were above him, and below him, successful in their own rights. Hence, in the kingdom, Wyatt was not the king's favorite child. Alongside his mother's early death, it meant that he was raised by a steward. This led to his wild and arrogant behavior. Apparently, education within the royal family couldn't seem to change this habit. When things were going well, Wyatt tended to be polite. However, when he felt hurt, he sought reckless acts of revenge. By this time, Wyatt was convinced that it was Abel's fault. It was Abel who had caused these chains of events that made his life miserable. Hence, Abel had to pay the price. The royal warhorses were the best of the best from the Duchy of Carmel, but within half a day's pursuit, White Cloud took around an hour to catch up. Looking down from the sky, Abel recognized Prince Wyatt and his 2 elite knights. Wyatt's distinctive royal dress, as well as the golden armor of the knights, made it easy to spot. Abel then took the necklace out of his coat, placed it on his hands and began chanting the ancient orc spell. With a flash of green light, Abel had soon turned into a wargen. In his heart, he commanded White Cloud to dive down. The mark of the Horadric square on his hands began to flash as White Cloud's body drew a beautiful curve and came swooping down. "Look out! Something's up there," said an elite knight. Their sense of awareness was very sharp, reacting to attacks was an instinct for them. The knights immediately flashed their combat chi and shook their bodies while they moved in front of Prince Wyatt to protect him. "It's a sky sparrow, it's an orc attack," said the knight. He looked up at the sky. There was a huge sky sparrow came swooping down. When White Cloud was around 20 meters above the ground, it began to fly back up. Abel quickly took the 4 exploding swords from his Horadric Cube, which were resting at the time. Within half a second, he took them out and threw it down with all his might at the 3 men on the ground. Watch out for dark weapons. Defensive position. With Prince Wyatt behind them, the elite knights could not give in. They had to use their swords, which were filled with combat chi, to defend. Although their swords were not very wide, the well-trained elite knights didn't think that 4 dark weapons from the sky were able to break their defenses. 1, 2, 3, Abel counted in his mind, as 4 bangs followed, sending dust and gravel flying around with the blast. Abel sat on White Clouds and looked down, after the dust in the wind driven away. The 2 elite knights wearing golden armor were covered with scars, fresh blood gushing out from their wounds. 2 elite knights were badly injured in at least 10 places, but they had a very strong vitality which allowed them to stand still and maintain a defensive posture. "Go down," Abel said to White Cloud. About 10 meters above the ground, Abel jumped off from White Cloud and went towards Prince Wyatt with a long rifle. The damage to Prince Wyatt's body was very minor. The main damage was blocked by the 2 elite knights in front of him. Although there was a wound on the Price's left leg, which was bleeding, he still could not fully comprehend what had just happened. This marks the end of part 17 of the story, Abe the Wizard. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.